All of these trainings are being recorded so that we can share them on our website and on our YouTube channel to be reviewed at a later date. We will keep everyone on mute. You're welcome to unmute yourself when we start having some discussion and some questions. But for now, we'll keep everyone muted just to reduce the background noise, make sure everyone can hear. For those of you who don't know, I'm Kevin McLean. I'm the VCAP coordinator with the association, and I am simply facilitating this meeting today because Maura Christian, our VCAP assistant coordinator, will be leading the entire training. She's done a great job really taking our training program forward and has communicated with many of you, especially those at districts, on all things VCAP. As we go along, please enter any questions you have or comments in the chat box. I will do my best to monitor those and respond to those myself when I can. And then I will also pass questions to Maura as needed as she goes along. We do have a number of folks on today from districts, from partner agencies, and also some special guests who we will be honoring with our annual VCAP awards today. We would love to be presenting these in person at our annual meeting like we normally do. But obviously that's just not in the cards this year. Thanks to all of you who have remained flexible this year and patient as we all kind of learn how to navigate this new world. And for those that have continued to pursue VCAP and submit applications, we appreciate that. We will discuss a bit today kind of what the picture looks like moving forward for VCAP. But as always, we say, keep on applying, keep getting those projects submitted, and we will keep growing the program. With that, I am going to pass it over to Maura Christian. If any of you have not had the chance to meet her, she's been on board for a little over a year now as our assistant coordinator. Obviously, for a good majority of that time, things have been a little weird, so folks haven't had as many opportunities to meet her in person, but she has done a really amazing job helping to grow this program and administer it. So with that, here is Maura.
Thanks, Kevin. That was very kind. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Like Kevin said, I wish we could be in person at annual meeting together, but it's where we're at. And I hope in the future I'll be able to meet some of you that I've not had the honor to meet yet. So looking forward to that someday when that's safe. We have some great partners, directors, old and new VCAP district staff. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope this is useful to people in different levels. If you're brand new to VCAP, I think this will be a great introduction to kind of what we're looking for to help out on homeowners and property owners' properties. But if you are, been around for a while at the district, I hope you'll still be learning something today that will help you with VCAP or just give you an introduction to it. Like Evan said, this will be recorded today and posted on the VCAP website, as well as our YouTube page and the association's website, where we've linked all previous training blitz we've done this year in lieu of our in-person annual meeting. So feel free to look at that after, share with anyone at your district that might find this useful. While talking about the website, we've also updated some photos and training resources. So if you have time this holiday season, feel free to take a look. It might be helpful if you've got some time on your hands. And today we will in bulk be covering identifying resource concerns and kind of the guidelines that we have set at the steering committee. This is important this year because we have kind of reframed those resource concerns starting July 1st. So in our fiscal year 21 or program year 21 guidelines. And this will really, not only help you identify resource concerns, but help you inform the rest of the VCAP process and kind of how that baseline can help throughout the whole process. And this is going to be a lot of photos, a photo heavy training that's been requested and was great feedback from our previous training. So I hope that you'll be able to see some great BMPs in a year that we haven't really been able to get out and look at those kind of things. And I'll kind of throughout the whole training today answer some frequently asked questions and common points of concern to kind of throw those in here as well. And we will also be able to recognize our 2 VCAP award winners who I see are on the call today. So thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to recognizing you. And we'll also talk about the Thomas Jefferson Soil Water Conservation District's local funding that they've been able to kind of leverage with their localities. We weren't able to have a Thomas Jefferson rep today, but I will be doing that portion of the training, and I hope I can do it justice. And at the end, we'll have time for questions and discussion like we normally do at the in-person meeting. So feel free to throw those in the chat box throughout the whole training, Kevin might be able to answer them or stop me at any point. Kevin, you can stop me at any point, or save them for the end, and we can have you come off mute and kind of discuss as normal as we could with a normal discussion. Before I dive into the resource concerns, which I was hoping to cover today, I did want to give everyone kind of an update on where VCAP is at. And if you're unfamiliar with the program, this might be helpful for you. So since 2016, when we really got going with the program, we have completed 570 BMPs. And that measurement is taken through fiscal year 20. So 2016 through July 1st of this year. And since that mile marker, we've completed, I think, about 40 more projects. So we're really cruising. Demand's been really high since COVID-19. And I forgot to mention on that number, 570, that kind of includes, once we stopped cost sharing for permeable pavement and impervious surface removal back in, oh gosh, it was before my time, 2018, I could be wrong. But since then, we only pay for permeable pavement, but in our report in DEQ, we report them as 2 projects. So that number includes, after that time, it includes permeable pavement and impervious surface removal, because that's, again, how we report to DEQ. At this time, we are on a wait list because demand has been so high, which is great, but unfortunate at the same time. We do have some funding on the way that will, at this time, clear that wait list out. But of course, with new projects coming in every month, we can't really predict what our wait list might look like, but we are hopeful that we will continue to be able to fund projects this year. And with that, I want to emphasize that we really encourage districts to continue to submit projects, even if we're on a wait list at this time. Once we have that funding in hand, we want to get that money out the door and allocated. So we're not going to sit on the money when we get it. So please submit applications as you're able, so they're waiting and ready to be funded when we have those funds in hand. At the same time, we're still looking for new funding opportunities. We have that funding coming from DEQ, and we're hopeful that funding is coming from the state again. We'll find that out soon, but we are actively seeking new funding opportunities. And because of the state dollars that I mentioned, we have been able to expand outside the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And it's not evident on this map, but we have completed some projects outside the Chesapeake Bay watershed out in Southwest Virginia, which is amazing and a huge accomplishment for VCAP this year that we're very proud of. And we also have some more approved projects out in that area with brand new districts who are just learning VCAP. So I hope some of you are online today or will be able to watch this webinar, because we are excited for them to keep on doing VCAP. And stay tuned for future VCAP trainings for 2021. There's a big question mark over what 2021 will look like, but we hope to be able to hopefully offer some kind of in-person, get out and look at some BMPs at some point. But if not, we will continue to do these webinars. I think they're hopefully useful and accessible for people. So here is an overview of the resource concerns I'll be talking about today that were newly updated for fiscal year 21. It may seem obvious to go over these terms, but I do think it's helpful to understand the definitions and their meanings in the lens of VCAP and show kind of what standards we are looking for, and show common issues that property owners face that may be helpful for you to see, and help offer solutions, or at least where to find those solutions to help property owners out. That's what we're all about. But just briefly, the 3 resource concerns that we have in VCAP are erosion, poor vegetative cover, and land cover that contributes to excessive runoff. In short, erosion is the loss and transport of topsoil. It's our least commonly submitted resource concern because it is the more severe issue, and one that we would hope would be fixed before it gets to this point kind of idea. But it holds the most worth on our ranking sheet. It's worth 20 points. And if you're not aware about our ranking sheet, it's how we determine which projects we're able to approve and in which order we're able to allocate funding to, and it also sets a minimum standard. They have to meet the minimum score of 65 points to be able to submit and be reviewed at our steering committee meeting every month. So these resource concerns each have their own weight in terms of how many points they offer to the ranking score and help us decide which projects we can fund. Poor vegetative cover is the low density ground cover that reduces the infiltration capacity of certain areas. And finally, this is the new resource concern that we've kind of reframed as opposed to previous years, and it is land cover that contributes to excess volume and rate of runoff. And basically that would be any kind of impervious surface, compacted or poorly managed lawn that increases the volume and rate of runoff. And if you remember from previous years, if you were involved in the program, this used to be broken down into two resource concerns, and that was impervious runoff, so any kind of driveway, sidewalk, roof, and managed turf. So these have been kind of bulked together into one. And I think in a way, these changes simplify, hopefully for districts, identifying resource concerns when you're out in the field and putting together applications, but it also kind of adds some restrictions into what we're able to approve because demand has been so high, and we're looking to approve the projects that will give us the best water quality improvement and the best cost as well. So in a way, it simplifies the number of resource concerns we have, but I think this adds restrictions. So we'll talk about that today. And kind of why is this important and worth talking about? Like I mentioned, as the programs become more competitive and is growing, it's increasingly important for us to help district staff correctly identify and address the most accurate resource concern when they're out in the field. It's the basis to help us decide which projects we're able to provide funding to on the ranking sheet and fund the most high quality projects that improve water quality. And specifically, we're looking for reductions in nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And that's, at the forefront of our minds right now as we get near WIP 3 and our TMDL goals. And we as VCAP want to ensure that we're doing the most to help work towards those goals. And this is a quote from the manual that kind of encompasses the goals. But as you're going out on site visits and you're helping give technical advice to property owners, sites should have an identifiable water quality issue or resource concerns. And the BMP selected must address the identified resource concerns. Whenever possible, one practice should address the resource concern. And just wanted to kind of elaborate on the one practice should address the resource concern. This kind of comes up frequently when people are giving technical advice and wondering how many applications they submit for a certain property owner. So it's not to say that more than one BMP shouldn't be submitted by one property owner, but if one BMP can address the issues they're facing, then one practice should be submitted and approved. And that's kind of all the steering committee looks at all of this. If a homeowner was to submit a rain garden application and conservation landscaping, we're going to look and see which BMP would address the resource concern at hand and is more than one necessary. So we kind of talk about all those things. And pinpointing the resource concern and its impact downstream helps districts pick a BMP and help offer that technical advice and be confident that it'll function for the 10-year lifespan, which is how long these projects should last and be prosperous. And again, this is always site specific. So it's easy to talk about how you should identify resource concern, but it's always going to be based on the site and kind of talking to the homeowner about what their problem is. So there's more of a communication in there as well. So I will dive into our first resource concern, which is erosion. And like I mentioned, it's of the three, it's a larger issue that homeowners or property owners are going to be facing. And by definition, it's an area of land subject to soil erosion or deposition and resulting in some kind of sediment delivery onto neighboring areas or waterways. And the visible indicators of this would be signs of rills, gullies, and or deposition. And if you're used to working with the VAX program, this is much smaller scale than probably what you're used to, but I've got some photos that hopefully will help put this into perspective. And I've got a kind of snapshot of the ranking sheet at the top here. That's the header of the ranking sheet, just to kind of quickly talk about how you would even start to fill that out if that's helpful to people. So if you're looking at a site that has identified erosion as the resource concern, you would put erosion in this top column up here. You can pick between the three, and you also would put a 1 at the very first section next to erosion. So sites can only receive one resource concern or receive points for one resource concern, and you would choose the most severe of the one that you're facing. So if a site is having erosion issues, they're probably also having poor vegetative cover, but you would rank it as erosion because that is the higher of the three. So here I'll jump us right into some great photos. Some are from VCAP's site visits and some are for some other training events that we'd attended. But here are some photos that demonstrate the delivery of sediments either into waterways or to impervious surfaces that lead to storm drains, etc. But to be considered erosion, the site should have colored or muddy runoff or rills or gullies at least 2 inches deep. And this is what it should look like on paper, but this of course would look different for every site. This photo on the right here, they were experiencing some erosion right on this man-made small lake at our retirement community. And they ended up adding conservation landscaping to that kind of area just above the water. And they also removed some impervious surfaces. So they kind of combated erosion in 2 ways that way. They reduced the volume of runoff coming by removing some kind of pavement and then also adding some native plants and grasses to kind of buffer out that water. And it was very successful. And they also, not just because of this project, but the site has done a lot of really great sustainability initiatives, and they were named a Virginia Treasure by the governor. So that's really awesome. These top 2 photos on the left here in the center are actually from Virginia Tech when Kevin led a stormwater walk with the campers at Youth Conservation Camp a couple years ago. And you can see these are examples of not the greatest stormwater management. You've got an eroding hill here with sediment that's visible here just below the curb. So that's a big indicator of sediment is washing from that hillside and will be brought to some kind of storm drain. So looking to stabilize that site would be really beneficial for Virginia Tech. In this top left photo, you've got some major erosion happening just above this storm drain. And I'm not confident what kind of drain that is, but that would rank quite high in VCAP standards for its proximity to some kind of stormwater conveyance. So if you have sites that have issues like that are near their neighborhood storm drain or storm ditch or a waterway, those are projects we really do want to fund and will rank quite high. And I have an example of the ranking sheet later that will kind of demonstrate that, but that would be high up on our list to fund, most likely. In this center bottom photo is a pretty common photo that we see a lot, where there's just poor vegetative cover, there's washing sediment kind of all over on the property. So there's a lot of possibilities for what kind of BMPs could be installed in that site. I believe they chose to do some conservation landscaping, but just some great examples of erosion on sites that you might see. And we have some really great charts in our manual. These 2 happen to be from section 2.2 and 2.3. If you're new to VCAP or looking to learn more, I would recommend you take a look at either our district reference guide, which can be found on our VCAP website under our training resources, or if you've got time on your hands, take a look at the whole manual or parts of it. It'll really help you give us an overview of the program policies. And if you're looking to learn about really what stormwater is and why it's of concern to us, there's a great overview of that in the manual as well. But these charts really help guide identifying resource concern on site. So I just kind of took a screenshot of just the erosion, but it also lists the other 2 resource concerns. And it kind of helped to take it a step further. And so, you know, there's an issue on site, and if you can identify why or where that issue is coming from, this chart will help you. If impervious surface you think is contributing to an issue on site, the recommendations here are to disconnect, dissipate, disperse runoff, infiltrate runoff, and if it's coming from a lawn, it's slightly different. And for a forest or offsite, you can see that there. This might seem common sense to folks, but if you're new, this is really helpful to kind of help you guide your site visit and guide giving recommendations. And as you become more comfortable with site visits and providing technical advice, this won't be necessary for you to look at all the time, but I did want to point it out as something that helped me learn and could help you as well. And with that chart, with the charts in that section of the manual, there's also suggested BMPs to recommend for each resource concern. So if you were to look at erosion in that column, conservation landscaping, rain garden, dry well, constructed wetlands, vegetated stormwater conveyance, bioretention, infiltration, or living shorelines would be ones you'd want to suggest. These are just guidelines. Of course, sometimes you have other BMPs that might actually be really beneficial, but as a whole, and these would be the recommendations you would give. And I've got some photos of these BMPs that will be helpful for you to see, I think. So first, I've got this site that was in Chesterfield County, I believe. They have a pretty gradual but significant slope, poor draining soils, excess runoff coming from uphill properties. And this is something that is pretty common, I would say, for big neighborhood communities where there's, you know, one house that's kind of at the bottom of the hill receives everyone else's runoff. It's just the way it is. And because of the large amount of persistent deposition they're receiving in this kind of pretty concentrated area, this would definitely be classified as erosion. I know this homeowner had tried to fix it on their own. They had tried multiple plantings and buffers and nothing was working. So with some work, they were able to apply to VCAP, and they installed a dry swale. There are some really great photos. That's why I was really excited to share this with you all today. Let's see. So they were very successful in this swale. It solved their issues from as far as I know. I hope it's still flourishing. This is a type of vegetated stormwater conveyance, if folks weren't aware of that. And let's see, you can see on the far left, there's some photos of the installation process, which we love to see. And if your district staff who submit applications to us, these kind of photos are really helpful for us to see kind of what is underneath the BMP, because if we only receive the finished project, it's great, but we don't really know what's happening beneath the surface. So photos like this really help us feel confident that the BMP is going to survive and do great. So you can see they measured out 30 inches of excavation. They connected their downspouts as a bonus. They probably had a drainage area large enough that they didn't need to do that, but this was just their goodwill to attach those downspouts, and it probably wasn't, you know, very expensive to do that. And there's a perforated pipe under drain, and you can kind of see here where there's a pen on the ground, very small on the right photo, and that's where the first check dam is. And there's one as well at the bottom that's not visible here, but a great example of how erosion was combated with a more structural BMP. Here is another example. This is a site that was one of our early on applicants, and one that we have some great photos I'll show you next. But another site that is experiencing erosion. And I think what's unique about this site is, one, they're right on a body of water. And it's a good visual of what most homeowners who may be experiencing erosion and issues like this wouldn't be able to see if they're not in the water. So you can directly see the sediment that washes into the lake. That is very obvious that erosion is happening. And the homeowner here wanted to do their part to kind of reduce the amount of stormwater that runs into this lake. And you can see at the base of their property, right in the water, there are some visible rills, small scale, and there's definite soil loss. And that's coming from all of the impervious surfaces and the velocity of the water as it, you know, reaches that point on the slope. And after they went with a conservation landscaping, this portion is a meadow. They also installed, I believe, a dry well and a rain garden, which I didn't include here, but I'll focus on the conservation landscaping. They were able to stabilize their slope with that meadow up at the top to infiltrate more water, slow the water before it reaches the lower portion where we saw the erosion happening. And those native plants are doing a great job of absorbing that water. And I think something I wanted to point out is that this conservation landscaping sometimes is a point of confusion when it comes to the drainage area and when you're submitting an application, what you can kind of give it credit for. So any kind of conservation landscaping, aside from a filter strip, which is a CL4 in our manual, can only get credit for the footprint of the practice. So this, I believe, was 2,000 square feet. I'll just say that is, for example. When putting in information on the ranking sheet, it would only get credit for that 2,000 square feet, even though it probably is treating other drainage areas, such as part of the roof or the driveway, for example. But because when we submit our projects to DEQ, they only get credit for the footprint. So that is why they don't get points for that. And I think this comes up a lot, is, you know, points of confusion is, in the past, we might have allowed that, but yeah, just keep that in mind. And I have a good example later on of an actual ranking sheet that shows us if a visual would help. And just for fun, there's some golden retrievers in the background that if you look closely, you can see. So I have another great example of erosion, and this one's on a critical slope. You can see here they have exposed roots, some areas with some more distinct small scale rills and gullies, definite muddy runoff that enters the neighbor's properties, adjacent stream, and they also have a buried downspout that you can see has kind of been exposed that flows into a storm drain. So I have a lot of kind of different issues going on here, but the clear one is the slope is not stabilized and they're experiencing a lot of soil loss that is entering waterways and neighboring properties. When it comes to slope, projects on slope can receive a lot of bonus points in our ranking sheet. So for example, this project could get 20 points or, eligible for 20 points if they're treating that poorly vegetated slope that needs to be greater than 15%, which would be considered a critical slope. And mulch bed conservation landscaping could be really beneficial in this sense to stabilize and cover. A meadow could be an option if, pre-treatment was considered and put into the application. And also something they could do would get them a little bit less points, only 10, if they intercept that stormwater at the top of the hill, top of the slope before it reaches and hits the actual slope. So there's kind of two courses of actions for a site like this. They could provide vegetated cover on the actual slope, or they could do a more structural project at the top of the slope to reduce the volume and speed that's entering the slope. For a space like this, space could be an issue. I don't know if they could fit a rain garden at the top of this slope, but also dry well, infiltration, a couple different ways they could go about solving this issue. And this is an example of a ranking sheet for a project like this. And this actually is the ranking sheet from that project. If anyone was interested in what it might look like, you would start with the very top right yellow, let's see if you can see my mouse, yellow portion up here. You would put in the BMP that you're looking to apply for, conservation landscaping, the cost that you've received from the contractor, or if the homeowner has put it together themselves, and you would do the correct 75% up to $300 or $3,500 here. And they are experiencing erosion, so you'd put a 1 next to the resource concern. It's a private residence, so you put a 1 next to the ownership type. In this case, the site runoff is currently untreated, so they would receive 10 points for that here. And here's kind of where bonus points would come in that would really strengthen an application, or if you are on a site, you might start to notice things that would cause a project to rank higher. So this project is within 40 feet of a stormwater conveyance system, and they've got a couple that I mentioned earlier. And here's that slope that I was talking about. They were able to treat a poorly vegetated slope, a critical slope.
And Maura, we have a question related to that. It says, why would that give them less points for intercepting at the top of the slope?
Oh, okay. For this site, that is a good question, and one that it's just the way our ranking sheet works out. I think that the steering committee would look at that and say that you are solving part of the issue, but this site right here is still very unstable and there would still be washing of that sediment. So that's my thought process to why points would be less. I think a rain garden would still be really beneficial in this sense, with recommendations to seed or do some kind of cover here, if that answers your question. But like we kind of always say, that's the number one right answer when it comes to what BMP is right. So everyone's got their own opinions on what would work, and it does come down to the homeowner preference and what they really want on their site. If they have children who play on this slope, maybe they don't want to install a conservation landscaping for 10 years there, so that plays a role as well. Okay, and when it comes to the limited points that conservation landscaping can get, this second section under BMP selection is what I was talking about with the previous conservation landscaping that was on the water a couple slides prior. So conservation landscaping is only eligible to receive points for the surface area of the project, and that would be this very bottom section that I've got, and 2,000 square feet is the size of this one. They're not eligible to get points for impervious area treated or the total contributing drainage area. And that's where sometimes extra points would come for other BMPs. So in a way, conservation landscaping is harder to rank in that way, but certainly it's still very popular BMP and one that we receive great projects for. And this is the bottom section of the ranking sheet here. If there's other ways that you may be looking to get points for a project or want to talk to homeowners about, there is a section that is points for applicants that work with a partner agency or nonprofit, and as well as being publicly accessible or part of an education program. So any way you could tie in partnerships that are not having to do with MOAs or MOUs or permitting agencies is beneficial. Can you partner with some of your own district partners and offer a educational program with a rain garden that's installed, for example? Things like that can really help strengthen a project if homeowners are willing to put in that little bit of extra work to create those ties together. And the final ranking score for this project was 94.4 points. So it ranks pretty well considering it was a conservation landscape project. And that was because of the slope that I was talking about and the proximity to a stormwater conveyance. And here's a finished project for this one. It's connected to a previous planting that they already had, as you can kind of see on this far left photo. And they're hoping to fill in the entirety of it. And of course, this was just after installation, so it will become much more lush and filled in as it ages. But this is the first look at it. And this is what was submitted with the project for payment request. So if you're a new district wondering what kind of photos I want to submit to the final payment request, that would come to me and Kevin. These are the photos that you would attach to it. So yeah, a great project, and this was in Northern Virginia. The last example of erosion I wanted to talk about was living shorelines. And again, this is a photo of a project that was just installed. So, but I think it is a great before and after photo to show kind of the stabilization of a failing shoreline management in the living shoreline that was installed on the right. And this will fill in with grasses and be tall and beautiful. And I did want to kind of clear up or introduce what a ranking sheet might look like for living shorelines. So erosion would always be the resource concern for a living shoreline. And the only set of points that I think might confuse folks that living shoreline is not eligible for, and that is the slope here. So you would not put a 1 next to either of these for a living shorelines application. And that's because unlike our other BMPs, which are treating stormwater runoff, this BMP is different. And the idea was that you're treating the shoreline, a different resource concern in that way. All right, that covers erosion, and I will move forward to poor vegetative cover. I'll just read the definition here. Poor vegetative cover will be defined as a site that has not uniform or mature vegetation that is causing erosion potentially, and the visible indicators would be bare spots, stressed, diseased, and dead vegetation that results in vegetation density less than 75%. And there's many reasons, why poor vegetative cover comes to be. Those could be natural reasons, that could be human reasons, and that's something that is important for the district staff who's out on a site visit to kind of debunk and understand, and that comes from talking to the homeowners and asking questions about how they use their property. Also could be, shade on site. There's things like that all play a role in why poor vegetative cover might be an issue on site. And again, here's a snapshot of what the ranking sheet would look like at this point. You've seen it a couple times, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you would put a 1 next to poor vegetative cover and put that as well in the top right, resource concern. Oops, sorry. So here are some photos of poor vegetative cover, pretty common photos, I would say, ones that you might see pretty frequently on site. And to be considered poor vegetative cover, the site should have problems with vegetation growth or ground cover density that's less than 75, 90%. I give that range, and this comes from the charts that I had shown for erosion that I just didn't include on this slide, they have indicators of fair, good. I'm blanking on the last one, but there's kind of a spectrum of what density we'll look at, and it kind of comes down to the site specifically, so a certain area that is experiencing poor vegetative cover. And the BMP suggested to assist, or to solve these resource concerns are much smaller. There's a smaller spectrum of those. They're all vegetated. Conservation landscaping, vegetated stormwater conveyance, or rain garden. And I will say all photos that I'm going to show you today for this resource concern were solved with conservation landscaping. That's not to say that other projects couldn't be submitted. But that is the most common and the most one that we see and have great photos for. And these photos here show poor ground cover. These bottom two photos are from the same site actually, and they could be due to standing water. The top photo potentially could be leaf cover that was left too much that killed vegetation underneath. It really comes down to what is happening on site. But for this, we like to kind of look at the whole property and like to have photos from more perspectives because the reason behind poor vegetative cover is very important, and one that the steering committee wants to look at as a whole property. And here's the chart that I was discussing that kind of helps guide your recommendations by looking at the source of runoff that's causing poor vegetative cover, all of which would be to consider some kind of native planting if appropriate, or amend the soil is a very simple answer. Soil test is something that some districts require. We recommend to be done, and it is required if a homeowner or property owner wants to amend their soil with fertilizer, compost, things like that. That is necessary to demonstrate the need for that, because of course we're looking to limit the amount of fertilizer that homeowners are putting into the ground. This photo here, it took in my neighborhood. It's a very urban area, obviously, so it's not relevant to everyone, but you can see that there is poor cover in this small area of yard, and almost could be considered erosion if the washing was demonstrated and you could see muddy runoff. But for a project like this, if there is a small area with poor cover, maybe a rain barrel, which is not a VCAP BMP, but maybe that would be something you recommend on a smaller scale, or just to reseed. Sometimes a simple answer is the right answer, and VCAP isn't always the answer. Not to say they couldn't apply for conservation landscaping, but sometimes the best solution is a simple one. So sometimes conditions on site or complaints that a property owner might have could be due to human causes instead of what I was just discussing about standing water or runoff from neighboring property. For example, this photo on the left, or sorry, excuse me, the photo on the right, the issues they're facing might be just because of the maintenance at the site. So maybe their downspouts are clogged, their gutters are clogged, and that might solve some of their issues. Maybe they're doing vehicle maintenance on a certain area of their property consistently, or riding bikes or parking their bikes, human traffic on a certain path on the way to their back shed, children swinging on, dragging their feet on the swings. I know I was guilty of that, or, trampling certain areas. So while VCAP could be the answer and might be really great, one of the solutions might be as simple as seeding and recommending that certain areas are given time to recover on their own and undisturbed, and they might flourish that way. It's ultimately up to the district what kind of advice you want to give to sites like this, and what you're comfortable with and what your district chooses to do. But just something to keep in mind on site visits, and not just this scenario with poor vegetative cover, but really any kind of site visit you go on. In this photo on the left, I believe they were doing some kind of maintenance in a certain area that was causing them to have bare spots. So here's a really, really great example of a kind of before and after of a, very bare backyard, almost completely bare except for the top portion that you can kind of see above the slope. And they were, having some shade during the summer from their large trees. That was also playing a role. But for this site, a meadow was the great and appropriate solution to solve their issue. Had this been caused by concentrated runoff from a certain downspout or a certain neighboring property in the area of the yard, maybe a swale would have been appropriate. But in this case, with this large area, the meadow was appropriate and very beautiful, I will say. And just a reminder that I thought I would add here, it seemed appropriate, is that leaf litter or mulch that's washing, or leaf litter or mulch is not considered to be poor cover and to be a resource concern unless it's washing. So if there's a photo that we see for an application that just looks like leaf litter or mulch, we're going to want to see evidence or a narrative that it is washing. And usually it's pretty obvious if that's the case and something that's been a consistent problem by the homeowner that they will share. I'll just quickly show some more before and after photos. Pretty common issues that you might see on site, just a gradual slope in the backyard that's carrying with it, and leaving behind bare areas. And they also installed the conservation landscaping. This is, again, just installed, so it's pretty fresh, but that will fill in very nicely and do a good job of managing their stormwater better. And I will say, like I mentioned, that, you can't get credit for impervious areas treated, but as you can see, this project still was able to tie in downspouts because they were already there, and they added some river rock as a backsplash to kind of slow that. But, they're still treating impervious surface despite it not being able to be ranked that way. And I will note that these two examples here, maybe not be the case for everyone. I don't know if a lot of homeowners would be willing to give up their entire backyard for a meadow. So keep that in mind as homeowner preference when recommending BMPs and working with them. And here, this is my last example for poor vegetative cover. Actually, sorry, there's one more after this. But they are experiencing a lot of poor cover. It's not even visible behind this photo on the left in their whole backyard, and some more major issues closer to their house with, a slope towards their property. So they chose to combat that by stabilizing the slope here and putting in conservation landscaping. This is an example of where they had a couple options and it really came down to what their preference was. So a more structural practice might have addressed the issue as well. Maybe an infiltration basin or a dry well could have also been really beneficial and infiltrate more runoff before reaching the house. But it's pretty common for homeowners to really want this beautiful conservation landscaping, and I don't blame them at all. It's very beautiful and filled in this area. And still does a great job of slowing that runoff and stabilizing that slope. This is my last example of photos for poor vegetative cover. They had purchased this property, and originally it was green, smooth grass up on that hill where the fence line is. And as years went by, 5 years, they noticed a lot of washing and eventually just couldn't get vegetation to grow there, which is very common. So they installed a stabilizing conservation landscaping mulch bed here. And there are things that homeowners can do kind of at their own preference to further stabilize the stormwater here. So they added in some river rock at the very bottom, and that's where they are experiencing some of the issues with small rills. And it was actually leaving their property and entering their neighbor's property there as well. All right, last but not least, we have land cover that contributes to excess runoff. This is kind of an all-encompassing of the of the resource concerns that we removed and replaced: impervious surface and managed turf. This is kind of jumbled together with, like I mentioned earlier, some added restrictions that we as a steering committee feel more accurately categorize the conditions that we intend to be allowable. And this is kind of thanks to the feedback that we received from our public feedback period last year, and the TAC kind of helped us reframe this. So this is kind of how we got to where we are. It's the most common resource concern that we receive applications for. also has the least weight on the ranking sheet. As you can see, it's worth 10 points versus, erosion being worth 20 points. And by definition, it is land cover that contributes to excess runoff. That means runoff from impervious surfaces, compacted lawns, poorly managed lawns that all contribute to an increased volume and rate of runoff. And this could be either concentrated or sheet flow that's causing some kind of damage downstream when not properly disconnected, dissipated, and dispersed into the landscape. So really looking for any kind of site that's causing damage downstream due to some kind of increased volume and rate of runoff. And there's a couple different common things to look for that I'll show here in a second. But here are some indicators of excess runoff. I would say compaction is kind of the lower scale of being an issue, but one that we still like to address and commonly will. You have impervious surfaces that would be considered connected to stormwater conveyances or waterways. And at the training I did back in February, I talked a lot about this if you're interested in kind of learning more about that, so feel free to check it out. But very commonly we have driveways that would be considered impervious surfaces that are contributing to excess runoff, sidewalks, rooftops, all of that would be eligible if it's causing some kind of damage downstream. Evidence of standing water, which you can kind of see at this bottom middle photo, very common as well. I feel like a lot of property owners have that one spot that never quite drains. I know my dad is always talking about that spot on his property, and one that, if causes damage, is eligible to be a spot where a BMP could be installed. And then, any kind of downstream damage from excess runoff volume and rate. And you can see this bottom left photo, a connected downspout that is contributing excess volume of water to that body of water. Or this bottom right photo, which I took in my neighborhood as well, shows downspouts that are bypassing the entirety of the mulch and going straight into the street where there is a storm drain. So that sense, it would be considered connected to a stormwater conveyance and contributing to excess volume and rate of runoff. So here are those tables again that I was talking about with guides to addressing resource concerns based on the 3 different runoff sources. And for this resource concern, there are a lot of options for BMPs, so I pretty much just circled them here on this chart on the right. Just take a look at those. For a whole, this BMPs for this resource concern are looking to reduce the volume and provide positive drainage. I like that term. On your site instead of letting it run off into the street or to a body of water. And this comes up pretty frequently. What about managed turf? This used to be a pretty common issue or common resource concern for conservation landscaping, and one that pretty much most properties would be eligible for. So with our changes in resource concerns that were redefined, managed turf is no longer inherently a resource concern on our ranking sheet. But I will say the steering committee may consider compaction as a concern that warrants a BMP if determined so. There are ways through soil tests to kind of determine compaction and see if it actually is an issue, but this would be kind of a case-by-case basis, and one that I'd be happy to talk to folks offline if you have any scenarios or at the end today as well to see if it would be considered resource concern. I mentioned this many times, but just reiterating that a normal conservation landscaping mulch bed or meadow is difficult to meet our minimum ranking score. Still really beneficial to convert a managed turf to a native community. But there are other BMPs that I think we're favoring and that our ranking score reflects due to their ability to control stormwater runoff. So here's a pretty common site condition for some minor standing water. They're having some poor drainage clearly, and that's due to excess runoff volume, probably from impervious surfaces nearby. And this by itself wouldn't be a resource concern unless, there is some damage coming from that water. So, submitting photos of the site just after it's rained, and then when it's dried out would be really helpful for the committee to see. So this far left photo is the site when there is no rain event that has just happened, and you can see that there is poor vegetative cover really, and looks like some compaction as well. And here they decided to put in a mulch bed along the fence line. Again, this is a really common solution that I think a lot of homeowners come to, and one that I think is pretty manageable to kind of vegetate the back portion of one's property, one that you wouldn't be normally walking around anyways. So this one was just installed and looks really great. And just to note, they had a couple large rocks and sticks that they decided to put in on their own. We totally encourage homeowners to kind of use what they have already. We wouldn't cost share for something like that, but if they've got it or willing to put it on their own, of course, feel free to do that as long as it's not inhibiting the BMP, its productivity. So here is just one before and after photo of a rain garden and dry well that was installed to kind of treat 2 drainage areas on the property. So one on one side of the house and one on the other. And they were able to successfully treat their issues with 2. And this is something that we talked about early on is, when demonstrated needed, 2 BMPs can be approved. And in this case, that happened and it worked out really well. They had some areas in the back of their fence where the water was all coming to the same point and causing damage. So, and leaving their property to go to their neighbors. And here's a kind of contrast to that minor standing water. Here's a more major standing water issue that a property owner up in Northern Virginia was facing. They actually called it the lake, which is funny, but pretty accurate. If you look at the photo on the right, there is a significant amount of water coming from the roadway, neighboring properties, their own driveway. So they had a lot of really forces coming to this one point, and they were looking to solve it. And you can see when it's dried out, there is issue with, killing vegetation and all of that. So they were experiencing a definite excess, amount of runoff volume and rate. And these are some really great photos I'm excited to share with you because I don't think folks can see a lot of infiltration trenches. So I've got some photos through the whole process that you're great to receive with the final application that I'm going to share here. You can see marked off, they did this kind of horseshoe shape of this infiltration trench, and they protected those trees with those 2, or they noted where they needed to protect those trees. And here are some photos of the excavation process. And you can see this top left, that is the first of them. And there is this kind of gravel diaphragm. That's the higher of the 2 levels. That's going to act as pre-treatment, so that would need to be cleaned and maintained. And then there is, the first layer of sand on top of filter fabric. You can see the observation wells sticking straight up that they will look for maintenance, and the other layers as well. Those storage chambers, I believe there were 6 of them. So if you were to have a smaller scale of this project, you would probably have 1 or 2, and that could be considered a dry well if the drainage area was smaller. And the final project can be in the bottom right 2 photos with the river rock on top, as well as the final photo on the right. It was just installed, so the site is not all stabilized yet, but it looks really great.
Maura, we're getting some really good questions too, and I've addressed the ones that I could in the chat box. But if you could answer, is the reason for compaction or bare soil taken into consideration, or just the fact that there is a resource concern, and where is the best place for staff to explain the reason for the problem?
Well, the reason is important, but not something that we take into account in terms of the BMP's ability to function. I think that we always encourage staff and applicants to put as much narrative as they can into the applications, as it helps the steering committee kind of understand why there's an issue. But we don't weight the reasons for something like that in our decision, really. An issue is an issue. And if it was something that was intentionally done by the homeowner, we might consider something else. If it could have been avoided and it wasn't, kind of thing, but that would definitely be a case-by-case basis. But I would recommend if you know the reason and the homeowner is aware of why there is a compaction issue, please do put that in the application. And that could be on the Form 1 or the Form 2, excuse me, in any of those sections that are appropriate. But a lot of applications come with supplemental pages, so you can really put that anywhere you want. We'll make sure we read that and get that across to the steering committee. I'm happy to elaborate more if there's more questions on that.
Nope, I think that's it for now.
Cool. I'm glad there's questions. These are great photos, so I hope they spark some kind of discussion. I have some more great photos for you. This is a place of worship in Henrico County, and they do have managed turf. So this is an example of how you might still be able to install a BMP if the ground is considered managed turf. And they were looking to treat the entire roof area, which is 5,000 square feet of this place of worship. And currently the downspouts were, connected to a local creek buried. So they were looking to do their part to treat that water on site if they were able, and put some downspouts in and treat that. And they were able to install a bioretention. And here are some really great progress photos that the contractor took through the process that we were able to see. You can see they had an excavation under the roadway for the under drain, and they did that because they rerouted that to avoid any kind of damage to the tree that was, you can kind of see in the background of that top left photo, which is great. You can see the soil media layers on the bottom, and the observation wells. And you can see during construction, the downspout was rerouted away from this just to protect the site and the loose soil. But there is some gravel that's going to show where the downspouts are going to go in that act as a pre-treatment and kind of guide the water into the bioretention. And here are the after photos. They look really great. And I'm excited to see this one myself. We'll just let everyone kind of look at it for a second. And it will be more stabilized, of course, as more turf is put in. Right now, it's just kind of hay. But a great example of a structural practice that treated too much impervious runoff. All right, here's just a quick photo. I don't want to spend too much time. I want to get to my other stuff, but just kind of permeable pavement is one obvious that is a too much impervious runoff resource concern. And normally we get applications that remove and replace an existing driveway or sidewalk or patio. And you can see photos here of just kind of the process of replacing that sidewalk, which was concrete, and replacing it with the permeable pavement. And just a reminder that I've harped on a little bit, but this issue where there's clearly too much runoff reaching this sidewalk actually in my neighborhood as well. This is probably past the realm of possibility for VCAP to solve as much as we want to. I think actually the case here was a clogged storm drain, which is solved with a simple issue to solve. But if this was an actual flooding issue, it's one that we want to get local government involved and send it higher up to try and help those property owners out, because this is clearly an issue, but one that a rain garden would unfortunately not be able to solve as much as we want to. Okay, so now I kind of want to switch gears and talk about a program in the Thomas Jefferson Soil Water Conservation District, and one that I was given this information from Chris Geyerson from the district. He's a conservation technician. We had hoped to have them involved in this discussion, but some scheduling conflicts came up, so I'll be doing it, and I hope I can do it justice. But I want to talk about an example of, as we move forward with VCAP across the state, we have new districts on board. We have districts that are submitting more applications and continue to be involved. I wanted to discuss about, collaboration with partners and, making VCAP work in your district. Of course, it looks different everywhere in the state, but this is an example of a district that was able to work with their localities and get some actual funding to do some projects of their own kind of through VCAP. There also are programs like this up in Northern Virginia Soil Water District, as well as Shenandoah Valley. So this is happening around the state, really exciting. And one is just an example of one that might encourage you to kind of reach out to your localities and see what could happen, or just encourage partnerships in general in your district, which I know is already happening. Okay, so the two programs that are a part of Thomas Jefferson Soil Water Conservation District are the Charlottesville Conservation Assistance Program and the Albemarle County Conservation Assistance Program, a mouthful. But these two programs are examples of how Thomas Jefferson worked with their localities, inform them of the great work of VCAP and the great work happening in the district, and were able to work together to form these two programs and offer funding to install BMPs that were already being installed through VCAP, and put funds towards those projects in their own respective areas. So the Charlottesville program, I'll just call it CCAP, was developed in 2014. So this kind of goes along, prior to VCAP, but I think they switched gears to kind of align it more with VCAP. And it was developed to accomplish the city's water resource protection program goals. And I have a little bit of information of that, and I apologize, I don't have all the background of these programs. I've just got kind of what I know. I do have Chris Geyerson, the technician from TJ, his contact information on a couple of slides below. So if you have any detailed questions about this, I would encourage you to reach out to him after this, but I'll do my best to kind of explain it. Let's see. So the WRPA, or the Water Resource Protection Program, was implemented to address the increasingly stringent stormwater regulations and manage the city's water more practically and sustainably. And they had already had a great partnership with Charlottesville and Albemarle prior to these programs that only helped the development of these programs. And let's see, ACAP very recently developed this year after the success of CCAP and VCAP, and they were able to kind of educate that locality about the success of those programs and find the funds to create ACAP to complement their stormwater utility fee credit system for their own utility system. And I've linked both those websites here below, and I'll post these slides on the VCAP website if you have interest in learning how it's kind of portrayed from the city and the county. And I've got some more information about the specifics of CCAP and ACAP. Each was, lucky to have or find funding in their own budgets to kind of put towards these programs, which I, of course, know is not the case for every locality or district, but both programs have slight differences in their internal goals, but all in all, they do the same. And Chris oversees both programs of the district as well as doing VCAP, so he is very busy. Both have received annual funding, and you can see those numbers here. This is from their annual report from 2020, fiscal year 2020. They have, let's see, CCAP has been able to put forward $37,000, and ACAP has been able to do just about $25,000, and that is for cost share. But both localities are able to provide funding for the administration and technical assistance to the district. So that's really beneficial and would not be possible for, for Chris to be able to do both these programs without additional funding for the administrative side of things. There's some more great numbers on here about, the number of projects funded, both of them are 10, the number of site visits they've done for each of those, which is great data to have, and how much runoff they've been able to reduce. So for a lot of these, the projects that are funded through CCAP and ACAP, they are funded 50-50 VCAP and the respective program that they're in. So if it's a rain garden, we'll split whatever cost share with CCAP, and VCAP will fund the other half. And we still provide technical assistance and report the project to DEQ if that was of concern to anyone. Practices are always built in accordance to VCAP standards, and they use a VCAP manual as a basis. So the creating of the program really was based off VCAP. And yes, so, funding is tight all around this year. We've had wait lists, more than one. So these programs have been really beneficial to VCAP to help us, stretch our dollars farther and fund more projects. So really happy to be able to highlight these two programs and the the partnerships that they've been able to create and get funding from. Here's an example of a time that ACAP, the Albemarle County, was able to jump in when VCAP was not able to. So this homeowner applied, and you can see in the far left is kind of their sketch of what they had planned. They had intended to do a rain garden, actually 2 rain garden cells surrounded by conservation landscaping. And VCAP was able to fund the rain garden, but not able to fund the conservation landscaping. So here's an example of how this partnership worked to kind of best of both worlds, provide both projects that they needed. And at times, ACAP or CCAP is able to fund projects entirely if VCAP is not able to due to funding. So it's a really great partnership and one that benefits both locality and VCAP. So I just put together some takeaways that might be able to help districts, and just, important things to keep in mind is just how important partnerships and building relationships with your locality. These 2 programs would not be possible if they not had that existing partnership. So Chris's recommendation, and one that I full-heartedly agree with, is to take a look at your locality's master plans or department programs or initiatives that might be of interest to the district and one that might align. If you have those overlapping areas in which VCAP could help, reach out to your localities and just start those conversations. Obviously, it's not a short outcome, but one that wouldn't be possible if those immediate relationships were not started. So, how can VCAP or the district, put VCAP aside, how could the district help localities support their own goals and be mutually beneficial to each other? And if VCAP can be a part of that, that's wonderful. If more programs like ACAP, CCAP in Northern Virginia and Shen Valley's programs could come apart, that would just be amazing. But there's other ways, of course, to support district work and work with localities. And I even just took this a bit farther and just, how can partner organizations that you might already have great ties with and work with each other, how could you work together to assist facilitating VCAP in your district? If VCAP is just, if time is a constraint, which is so understandable, maybe how could a partner organization be helpful, and how can you work together to kind of make it work with site visits? We have a couple of districts that work with their local partners and have been able to make VCAP work because of that, which is fantastic. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can certainly talk through those with you and share some more examples. I would be happy to. Here's Chris's contact information if you have any more questions about how ACAP and CCAP came to be. I don't know all nuts and bolts of the behind the scenes conversations that took place to kind of bring these programs to the forefront, but Chris will know those answers, and I'm sure I'd be happy to talk to you with them. This will be posted again, so if you need that, it will be on our website. Okay, let me check our time. I think we are doing well. Kevin, have any questions that I can answer before I dive into these award winners?
We've had several more come in, but I've been able to capture them in the chat box. Great conversation going on, but no more questions pending right now.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we've gotten through the technical portion of today's training, and I'm very excited to be able to talk about our 2020 VCAP award winners. This is the first year that we've ever asked for nominations, and that was a great success this year. We asked districts to nominate either a district partner organization or individual, or a VCAP participant that's installed a VCAP BMP. We asked district to nominate folks for both those categories, and we were able to recognize some really great folks that I'm excited to share, and they're on the call today, I believe. We also received other great nominations, of course. Wish we could recognize them all, but it was just, in a year that there's not a lot to celebrate, it was still great to see districts sharing their appreciation for their partners and their own VCAP participants. So that was very heartwarming to see. I will start with our VCAP Individual Leadership Award. Miss Karen Greenway from Hanover Caroline Soil Water Conservation District is our winner this year for the Individual Leadership Award, or the individual who's installed the VCAP BMP. And we were looking this year to recognize a participant that's installed a BMP and gone above and beyond the installation and basic requirements of the program. Looked for someone that engaged or educated the local community on stormwater issues, prioritized water quality treatment, and or effectively treated a resource concern on their property. And Ms. Greenaway fulfills all of those. And Friends of the Rappahannock with the Hanover Caroline District nominated Ms. Greenaway. So thank you so much for nominating her. I'm going to read quickly her bio kind of thing that was submitted with the nomination. Karen Greenaway owns 17 acres of land on the Rappahannock River in Caroline County, Virginia. The property abuts Portabago Bay, adjoining wetlands. Having recently bought the property, she has a 5.7 acre field that previously owner had kept in turf. Ms. Greenaway did not want to continue mowing the field and desired to have it returned to forest. Working with the Virginia Department of Forestry, the Hanover Caroline District, and Friends of the Rappahannock staff volunteers, she applied for and received VCAP funding to plant 1,717 hardwood trees, which is incredible. These trees will help connect 2 blocks of riparian forest and will eventually grow into a mature forest. She deserves recognition as she is a staunch advocate for clean water and wildlife habitat. Her commitment is demonstrated through her actions. This is the largest tree planting project Friends of the Rappahannock has taken part in through VCAP, and I believe is the largest for Hanover Caroline as well. And I will add that this is the largest tree planting for VCAP by far, and it was amazing to see came together quite quickly as well. And according to estimates that were put in her application, these 1,700 trees would remove 1.46 tons of suspended solids, 6.12 pounds of nitrogen, and 1.38 pounds of phosphorus. So I just thank you for your hard work, Ms. Greenaway. This is such a great demonstration of partnership, collaboration, dedication to conservation, and we are very proud to recognize you this year. So thanks so much for joining us today. We will be in contact about how we can recognize you offline. I wish we could be in person to recognize you, but I'm still happy that you could join us today on your Wednesday morning to let us celebrate you. And next we have the VCAP Community Partner Award, which we are proud to recognize SEAS, the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, nominated by the Northern Neck Soil Water Conservation District. And specifically, we have Mike Van Landingham and Aaron Wentz with SEAS. I'll just read a quick bio about what SEAS is if those aren't aware of the great work that they do and they have done for quite some time. SEAS is an agency with the Department of Conservation and Recreation that provides free services to private landowners and localities in Virginia in both tidal and non-tidal areas of Virginia. They provide site investigation and analysis, technical assistance, written advisory reports, construction plans, review those plans, inspect construction sites, and provide information and education about shoreline erosion solutions. So a long list of things they do, and I don't know how they do it all with just the 2 of them, but it's incredible. The VCAP Steering Committee was looking to recognize a partner organization or individual that has either assisted property owners or districts in the VCAP process, has installed a VCAP BMP of their own through VCAP, supports watershed efforts in their community, and or advocates for VCAP in their locality. And SEAS is such a great example of all those things. And I will go ahead and read the bio submitted by Northern Neck. Thank you so much for your nomination. We are happy to recognize you today. Mike and Aaron are essential to the VCAP process for living shorelines. They visit every site at the beginning, during the process, and for final evaluations. They evaluate the site and write a report discussing options available to the homeowner. Additionally, they advocate for VCAP to homeowners that have not reached out to the district. They review the designs and its feasibility within the VCAP parameters, as well as for preventing further erosion and shoreline loss. They not only answer all of my questions, but are there for the clients as well. They assisted the Northern Neck Soil Water Conservation District in creating a living shoreline checklist that is reviewed together by the homeowner, SEAS, the district, design and contractor to ensure a positive process and successful project. Mike and Aaron are kind, supportive, and experts in the field and enhance the VCAP process. Without them, the shoreline program would not be a success. It is my hope that they are honored with this award to further thank them for all of the efforts in supporting VCAP, but also the Bay. Thank you so much. That was beautiful nomination. And Mike and Aaron provide a immeasurable amount of support to VCAP behind the scenes, as well as they're on our technical advisory committee, and they're out there in the field with various different district staff. So I don't know how they do it all, but they are such a great example of a VCAP partner that we are great to recognize this year. And again, I wish we could be there to recognize you in person, but someday we shall be able to shake hands and thank you in person. That's all I've got for the rest of the training, but I did want to last minute plug. We have our 2021 public feedback form that is open until December 31st. And it would be greatly appreciated if you would be able to fill it out yourself or share with partners. This year, we're kind of looking to expand our pool of feedback that we receive. So if district staff, contractors, or participants of VCAP, if you have any contacts that you could share with who would be willing to share some feedback with us, it would be wonderful to help us make updates for our fiscal year or program year 22. The link is here, and it is also going to be posted on Facebook this week. Yes, we appreciate all feedback to help us continue to grow the program. And you guys are the ones on the ground kind of implementing it, so your feedback is greatly appreciated. Here is Kevin and I's feedback or contact information. Email is the best way to reach us now because we're in and out of the office. Schedules are different every week, so feel free to reach out with any questions on today's training, or if you have suggestions for future trainings, reach out to me. I'm in the process of planning 2021, so I would love any feedback or suggestions. You can also throw it in the public feedback forum if you're wanting to do that. But thanks for joining today. I can go ahead and escape my full screen so I can take a look at the chat box. We can have some discussions if you want to come off mute, whatever folks want.
Maura, are you able to put the link to the public feedback form in the chat box for me?
Sure.
It's people want to be able to click straight through to it and get started on it right away.
That is a great idea. Let me open that right now.
Absolutely. And Bill and a couple other people have asked as well. Yes, we will be putting not only the PDF version of this presentation up on our website under our training resources, but we'll also be posting the full recording of the presentation on our YouTube channel and website. So just check back for those. A lot of thanks to Karen Greenway and Mike and Aaron going on in the chat box here for their great work. Are there any other pressing questions before we wrap up today?
All right, I just posted the link to the public feedback.
Hey,
form.
Kevin, this is Chris up in Loudon, and I'm apologize if this was already asked early on while I was trying to connect. But what's our funding budget situation currently with VCAP at the state level? Because that's the first thing folks ask me when I do a field appointment with them.
Absolutely. It was addressed, but there is never any harm in asking that question more than once because it is the most common question. Thank you for that. So right now we are on a funding wait list, but we have two different pots of money coming from DEQ in the near future that will be more than enough to clear out that wait list. Our funding outlook in the coming year, in calendar year 2021, is a little bit tighter than usual. I think the reasons for that are probably pretty obvious. That has very little to do with VCAP and a lot to do with the situation in the world and in the state of Virginia today. That being said, we are staying ahead of demand for right now, and we are always encouraging folks to continue applying and submitting applications to their district, because we, as you've seen over the past few years, even when we do end up on a funding wait list, we get these seemingly random pots of money that come and go, that we can use quickly when other organizations don't use them. So there's always money coming. I wish that on a year-to-year basis, we could say, this is how much money we're going to have this year, and folks could plan for that, but that just isn't how it works. So just, keep expecting more money to come and keep moving forward with those things. I hope that's a clear enough answer. It's not exactly clear right now, but that's the best we've got.
Thank you, guys. Apologize for the repeat question.
No problem. Are there any other questions before we depart today? All right, well, I will go ahead and end the recording, and then I'm going to end the call as well. I want to thank everyone for